Welcome to Don't Chuck It Up, the podcast that takes the stress out of the college search and application process. I'm your host, Chuck, your friendly college counselor, and today we are talking about athletic fit. Should students go to D1 or D3 schools for that incredible athletic experience? And today we are joined by one of the people that I've known for almost my entire adult life, Al Reiser. Al, welcome to the Don't Chuck It Up show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Al, you have really been on the heck of a journey. You and I both attended a small liberal arts college in the D3 world. And why don't you tell a little bit of people about your journey from where we were at to college to where you're at now?
Yes. Yeah. So I went to Lawrence University, Division III liberal arts private institution. And then went to graduate school at Indiana University. And while I was at Indiana, I started working with the football team there. And those of you listening to this in 2026 might think, oh, wow, that's amazing. They won a national championship. When I was there, we won 3 games a year, and we're not very good at football. But worked with Indiana football. And then transitioned to the University of Utah, where I worked with their football program, and then ultimately worked up in athletic administration and was on senior leadership at the University of Wyoming, where if you are fans of the NFL, you might be familiar with Josh Allen, who I worked with at University of Wyoming. But throughout this whole process, I always had in mind kind of getting back to that Division III experience. And I did that a few years ago, and now I'm on senior leadership in the athletic department at Whitman College out in Walla Walla, Washington, which is another Division III small private liberal arts college, very similar to Lawrence.
Yeah, I was going to say, so far in your career, you've already kind of done the full circle. You know, some people wait until their end of career before they do a full circle, but you've already done that. You started off in D3, gone and did several institutions at the D1 level and really got involved in D1 athletics. And now you're back at another incredibly academically strong D3 institution in Washington. So that's quite the journey you have had there.
Well, and there's a direct correlation between I had children and I thought, well, I want my kids to go to a school like I went to. And I thought, well, hey, if that's what I want, maybe I should work at a school like I went to, right? So having kids have really closed that loop and completed the circle and inspired me to come back to this arena.
As it should. I think we have to own up on this show that you and I are extremely biased towards the D3 small college experience because that's what
Absolutely.
You and I both enjoyed as undergrads. For full disclosure, Al and I were on Residence Life team together. So we were resident life advisors way back in our college days together. Al decided to go on and become a hall director. Well, I actually went on to be a hall director as well after grad school. And then I quickly chose that res life was not my thing and admissions, student recruitment was much more my vibe. And you decided that athletics was more of your vibe.
Yeah. Well, and I would describe that as a surprise, right? That when I was 24 years old, I thought that I was going to be in residence life and in that world for my whole career. But then at Indiana University, I fell in love with athletics in a way. And there's an interesting piece of, there's a moment where I realized I'm never going to be wealthy enough to own an NFL team. But I could realistically run a college football team. And that was honestly like in this childhood fantasy way driving my entire career. and that's what led to this switch from residence life to athletics.
Well, and you probably have, interacted with students who have gone on to NFL careers, having worked at
Absolutely.
several D1 institutions. So that's kind of fun that way. I had the same kind of experience when I was at Iowa State University doing my master's work, a D1 institution. I had several students that were on the football team and got to have that connection and then watch them, go through the draft and get recruited. usually wasn't the televised draft. It was the later draft,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
but still got to see them, go on to some futures in NFL and those types of things. So it is a whole lot of fun. And I think that's why both you and I have enjoyed working at colleges, is really connecting with the students and watching them evolve and change over their experience. So what I wanted to talk about today is, you've really spent time at both D3 and at D1. A lot of students are really grabbed by the D1 experience because that's what they're seeing on ESPN, whether they are a super fan or they potentially want to play D1 athletics. And as I said, you and I have come from D3. What is your take as students and families are looking at the college experience? What is your take on that athletic side as students are
Yeah.
trying to figure out where they should go?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to know that the athletic gap between Division I and Division III is not as big as people think it is. And that ball is still ball, right?
Agreed.
That playing at the D3 level, it is arguably it's not as high as Division I, but that gap is not as big as people think. And in fact, when you look at D3 rosters, they are filled with people that started their careers at D1 and then transferred to Division III, right? That's a common thing. And in fact, whenever we go out and play a baseball game, that's the first thing that we do is we say, oh, well, this guy's a D1 bounce back, and this guy's right. Like it is common on to every team, including our team, right? We have a bunch of D1 guys. We just stormed through tennis championships with 2 former D1 players as our 1 and 2. So the first note is that the level of athleticism is not as big. The gap is not as big as people think it is.
Right.
The big difference between Division I and Division III is that in Division I, there is scholarship money tied to athletics. And in Division III, there's not. In Division III, you are purely playing for love of the game. And it's an important thing to keep in mind, because one, the money in Division I might not be as high as you expect. And two, if you have money tied to your Division I experience and you're not in love with the game anymore, you might be forced to stay in it because that's where your scholarship is coming from. So those are all kind of factors to play in. So when I say that the money might not be what you expect, so there are kind of different ways that scholarships are divvied out depending on sport. So if you play football, right, you're likely getting at the Division I level, you're likely getting a full ride scholarship and tuition, room and board, and cost of attendance, right? So some combination of a pretty good financial package. But I just mentioned baseball. If you play baseball, there's a pretty good chance that what you're getting is like a 30% scholarship and maybe books covered. And right, the money is not divvied out equally. And then on women's sports, it's not totally clear why some sports are prioritized over others. But if you play volleyball, really good chance that you're getting a full ride scholarship. If you play soccer, there's a good chance that, again, you're getting that percentage scholarship. And this has changed a little in the last years. So some people might have heard of the house settlement. But where that has really changed is at the major programs, at the Ohio States, at my alma mater, the Indiana, the Iowa States. That's where it's changed. But when you look at kind of the next tier down, so when you look at the Akrons of the world, or the Sacramento States of the world, or whatever that kind of next tier down Division I program, they're probably not giving scholarships full ride to everyone in that same way. So it's really important to think about, like, what is the actual cost of attendance? And yes, you're getting some scholarship, but you're probably still paying some as well, and balancing that out. The other piece in here, and I apologize if I'm going off on a bunch of different tracks here, is when you're debating between Division I and Division III, and this is to my stated bias earlier, that I think it's really important to think about the academic experience. That yes, you might have a stronger athletic experience. There might be more athletic perks. There might be more, you get more shoes and things like that at the Division I level. But if you're trading having a 15-person class for having a 300-person class, that's something that you really have to think about and weigh out. And that will be the case, right? If you go to a large school, even if you go to a super elite school, you go to Ohio State, you're going to have 300 people in your economics class, and you have to figure out, well, what's the academic experience that I want, versus what is the athletic experience that I want.
Well, right, and
so lots of things to debate about in this process.
So there's a lot of things I want to chime in on. One would be that class experience. When you're talking a class experience, you're not talking about an entry, like how many kids entered together. You're talking about the actual classroom. When you walk into your classroom, how many bodies are in that room joining you? Some of the major institutions are now moving to online classes for some of their intro courses for their first year and their second year students, because they don't have classrooms big enough to support everyone who is taking intro to psychology or intro to biology or intro to, the basic US history course or whatever. So there are students who are sitting at a couple institutions, shall I say, in Florida that are taking almost their entire first year courses online. And I'm just going, and they're still paying the full amount of money to go there, but they're taking them online. And I worry about that. I also worry that students pick a college based off of the current football schedule that just happened. So I'll use your example right away, like Indiana. It's like when you were at Indiana, if you won a game, that was like practically a miracle. To watch the team go through its evolution and what happened this past year with Indiana was freaking amazing. And I don't think any students there were ready for that. So, you're taking kind of a gamble as to, is your team going to be great this year versus not? There are kids right now who made it through the University of Wisconsin-Madison's football season, having going, why did I even go to a game? So it's like, okay.
That's a great example, because just 3 years ago, they were pretty good.
Right. So that's always a gamble with that. But it's also, I love that you brought up that the difference between a D1 athlete and a D3 athlete is not as far-fetched as what people think. I think for many of the adults who are listening to this podcast, they remember the days when there was a significant difference between D1 and D3. So we're talking, 25, 30 years ago, where literally there was a separation of athletic capability. But now, because of year-round sports and training and really all of the capabilities that we have with athletics in the United States, that distance between D1 athlete and a D3 athlete is very, very tiny.
Yeah.
I also,
and
go ahead.
A great example of that is, oh man, I'm gonna have to look his name up. I don't have it off the top of my head. 3 years ago, a school that we play is Willamette. They're in our conference. Willamette had the rookie of the year in men's basketball. He left Willamette and grad transferred to Washington State, and then from Washington State was drafted into the NBA. Right, like this is like within a 3-year span, this kid was in my conference, then playing in a major Division I, and then in the NBA. Right, and that's not unheard of. That the gap of talent is not as far as we think.
Right, it's not unheard of. I wouldn't say that it's a common everyday occurrence, but it is not completely unheard of either.
Right, right.
I do also want to say we are not ignoring our friends that are D2 or the NAIA, because those are also two very important conferences of colleges. D2, I'm not talking about as much just because it is one of the smallest conferences that is out there. So you're not going to have as many athletes there. It's kind of the halfway point between D3 and D1 as far as there are some scholarship dollars that are available, not typically full ride type scholarships. And they may be slightly different size or style institutions at D2.
Right.
And then,
well, that's what I was going to say about D2 is Division I tends to be kind of these giant Research I colleges where there's 25 to 40,000 students. Whereas Division II, you're much more likely to find the like 6,000 person school and have the smaller school experience and get, again, maybe 40% athletic scholarship in the process.
And there's also exceptions to everything that you just said. So
yes.
like I can think of Stetson University in Florida, which is a D1 football program, but I think they have a total of 3,000 students.
Right.
So or the University of Richmond in Virginia is a D1 institution, but they might have 4,000 students. It's pretty small. So there are exceptions to that, but those are few and far between. What we're used to seeing is the ESPN schools, which are the very big, mostly flagship style public institutions. And then I did want to do a small shout out to the NAIA, which is a different athletic conference from the NCAA. They do offer scholarships. They are primarily smaller to medium and also primarily religious institutions, not all, but primarily. So I have a couple students that have on to play sports at the NAIA as well. But what I really wanted to focus our conversation on is D1 versus D3, because those are the biggest groups that are out there that people ask the most questions about.
Perfect.
So how do you help a student with the challenge of many of the D3 schools being smaller academic institutions seem to have less majors or less academic areas, and then they look at these D1s which have, 100, 150, 200 different majors. How do you help an athlete who's coming to see you being at a D3 institution think about that difference? Like, okay, the major options.
Well, that's a great question. And again, I suppose it's worth noting that there are a couple different types of Division III institutions that, so the religious schools that you described, those are in Division III, right? So again, we play against Pacific Lutheran University, right? That's a religious school. But then there's also, I would say, kind of smaller regional state schools.
True.
Notably, I tore my ACL at the University of Whitewater in Wisconsin, so I have a particular grudge against them. But that's a Division III school. That's kind of a smaller regional state school. And then the third category is the kind that I attended and the kind that I work at right now, which is small private liberal arts colleges. So I'm going to frame my answer around small private liberal arts colleges, and that is, I would argue that the core concept of a liberal arts education is that on some level, major doesn't really matter. That the point of a liberal arts education is to teach you how to be a critical thinker, to inspire intellectual curiosity. It is to help you ask the right questions. And you're going to do that in the field of economics or in the field of chemistry or in the whatever it is, right? That the major is going to dive down on it. But the whole point of the liberal arts education is that on some level, you become a jack of all trades. And that liberal arts describes that, yes, you're doing 25 to 30% of your classes in one area, but you're really doing the majority of your classes learning everything and exploring everything, taking classes everywhere and in every arena, and learning how to ask the right questions and learning how to really dig down and analyze things. And it is not a major of specialization, right? So when you go to a big school that has a lot of majors, those majors are, well, I'm going to be an accounting major and I'm going to learn accounting, and maybe I have this clear in my mind. I'm going to be a CPA and I'm going to get the 150 hours and I'm going to sit for the test and do the whole thing, and I'm going to get out of it and I'm going to have an accounting job, right? And then that's great if that's your plan. But if you're 18 and you don't know what your job is going to be in 4 years, that the better path is to learn how to do everything, right? And learn how to be a good critical thinker and develop those skills that are going to apply universally and work offline to the people listening. Chuck and I were both talking about how we had this experience where we went to this small private liberal arts college, then we went to grad school, and we were hands down, each of us independently had this experience. We're hands down the best writers in our programs. 2 different programs, 2 different schools, but both had the same background. And the same background was that we went to this small private liberal arts college that really taught us kind of this critical thinking piece, all these other things, and taught us how to be good writers. And both of us had the same experience where the writing we did at undergrad was in fact harder than the writing we did at grad school. And that might sound intimidating, but that's actually a bonus, right? That is going to prepare someone well for the next level, whatever it is, the next level professionally, the next level in education. So I would say that you're right, that there are fewer major options in kind of these small schools, but in this private liberal arts sphere, there are the majors aren't as important. And what they're really doing is kind of creating this deep lifelong learner, creating this critical thinker, creating intellectual curiosity. And these, in fact, are the people that are going to go out and shake the world. That if you go in knowing you want to be an accountant, you're going to come out being an accountant. If you go in knowing that you just want to be the best student possible, you're going to come out and you're going to be a lifelong student. And that matters in those pieces. So again, and when I was thinking about my own career and where I want it to be and where I want my kids to be, I wanted to be at a small private liberal arts college because that is, in my opinion, the best version of higher education in this country.
That was beautifully said. I would tack on to that is that in my mind, the liberal arts experience, which has nothing to do with political affiliation or artistic capability, is really being able to learn something, unlearn something, and relearn something completely different. So we are trained how to understand information and compare, contrast. The how and the why questions are much more relevant than the who, what, where, because you can always look up who, what, where. So I think really diving into knowledge acquisition and understanding is a key part of those of us who go to small liberal arts colleges. So full disclosure, Al, what was your undergraduate major in?
Yeah, so I majored in English and I minored in theater. And I would have majored in theater, but I was doing sports and didn't have the time to do all the theater commitments that required the major. And when I was 18 and majoring in theater and English, I thought I was going to go out and be like a screenwriter and write plays, write screenplays. And then life changed, and I started working in residence life. And I thought, oh, well, hey, I'm going to be in residence life. And then life changed again, and I started working in athletics, and now here I am in athletics. And I do think it's worth noting that in each of those changes, I was well positioned to do that because of this same thing I was describing of kind of creative thinking and the ability to navigate all arenas.
Yeah, and as many of my listeners know, I have a double degree, Bachelor of Arts in Spanish with an education certificate and a Bachelor of Music in choral general music education. So also teaching. I was going to be a Spanish-speaking music teacher, did that, realized that K-12 was not my jam, so moved to the college realm and have evolved ever since. So that's why I've been trying to tell students is like, they're so worried, though, that they have to pick the absolute best college for the social experience, the academic experience, the location, those types of things. And with so much emphasis being put on athletics in American culture, I think it is hard for teenagers to separate themselves from the glitzy glam of athletics when they're trying to evaluate the right fit for them for a college or university.
Now, I will say that from an athletics perspective, right? If someone is a student athlete, that some of the concern about being at a giant college gets reduced by being within athletics. That athletics in some ways mirrors the small school experience. That there's 40,000 people at your college, but 700 of them are student athletes, and they're the people you see the most, and they're the people you interact with the most, and right. they're the people that have like close, tight knit communities. And a lot of those schools, they have their own private dining hall, yes. And then some might have their own private residence hall, right? And so they're the people you live with, the people you eat with, and so it feels like it's its own small community within this giant, large community. So I will say that some of the criticism of being at a school of 40,000 people is mitigated by being in athletics, but it's all the same things you talked about before of online classes and giant lecture halls. That still exists. There's not private classes for student athletes, but everything else does really get kind of shrunk and reduced. And there is a small, tight community. And in the same way that Chuck and I have known each other for years, and every now and then we'll bounce back and chat. And that same kind of community that you build at a small college, you would build within an athletic department at a large school. That is absolutely true.
I would 100% agree with that. And that was my experience working at Iowa State as well, is that the student athletes really knew each other. One of some of their complaints were is that they only knew the student
Sure, that is
athletes.
true.
Like
Yep.
my football players had a hard time identifying students because I would say, "Oh, do you know anyone else in your class that could help you work on a project or whatever?" And they were like, "Nope, I only know the football guys, and they don't know what's going on either. So I need to figure out something else." So then we'd have to find a tutor that was not a football person that would be able to help them. So yes, it is a plus, but can be a minus in certain instances as well.
Yeah, so I would joke that so at Wyoming we built a dining hall for all the student athletes, and I joked that that this is really an investment in getting the class in 20 years, because this is where people were going to meet each other and date each other and eventually get married and eventually have kids, and now 20 years later we're going to get their kids as recruits.
Yeah,
Because it is small like that.
it is.
People don't get out of the circle.
Right. And that's why when I hear students that are just like, "Oh, I would love to date a D1 athlete," I'm like, you may not actually interact with the D1 athletes as much
You
as
might
you
not meet them.
think. Right.
Yeah.
I think another challenge that D1 athletes, especially the most visible sports, so I'm thinking men's basketball, football, women's basketball, the ones that are really visible, and probably women's volleyball, is that all eyes are on you at a D1 school. So there were a
Yes.
few times when I was at Iowa State that an athlete made a bad choice on the weekend, and that would then end up in the school newspaper, literally the following
Mhm.
week. So I think that is another challenge of being at a D1 institution, is that all eyes are on you because you are representing the institution, both in the classroom, on the field or court or whatever it may be, and
Yeah.
potentially also on TV.
Well, and by the way, right, so like I'm wearing my Whitman stuff right now. Uh, Athletes are constantly branding themselves and stand out, right?
Yes.
Like, and at the D1 level, they will give you an entire wardrobe of clothes that
Mhm.
all the clothes you wear are going to be athletics clothes. So like you might stand out just because you're big and you're athletic, and then you're going to doubly stand out because you're wearing all all athletic gear. And the truth is that like when you are really in those programs and something happens, it might be a national story,
Yes.
right? That it might be an ESPN story,
Mhm.
or maybe even a USA Today story, that there is a lack of privacy. And in fact, I had a football player when I was at Utah that I had to constantly sit down with him and tell him, do not read the comments that fans write about you, right?
Oh.
And what would happen is he'd have a little bit of a hot temper and he'd get a penalty. He was an offensive lineman. He'd get a penalty for unnecessary roughness, something along those lines.
Mhm.
And then he would go on and he would read the comments about how, oh, this guy's an idiot, and this guy. And I'm like, oh my, you cannot live in that world. You have to turn it off. But like toxic fandom is a real
Yes.
issue, and it's actually gotten much worse with the advent of online gambling. So what has happened, and this has been a big emphasis of the NCAA. What is happening is people are going online and cyberbullying athletes when they make like just honest athletic mistakes. You miss a
Right.
free throw,
Right.
and how could you cost me $200,000? And it's been a real toxic experience for student athletes, so much so that we have like, monthly meetings talking about how to navigate that and how to
Mhm.
be better with that. And well, maybe it means you have to have private social media and you're
Yeah.
not on Instagram. Um, I will say that is a Division 1 problem. It's not a Division 3 problem at the same level, because there aren't betting lines in the same way
Right.
at Division 3.
Yeah, we could go a whole episode and talk about athletic gambling and how that impacts the college situation, because that's a whole nother topic
It,
for
it
another
is
way.
it's challenging.
The students that have literally bet away their entire tuition dollars for the next semester. But yeah, I think it's hard with social media, cameras being everywhere now. We all carry a camera in our pocket on a daily basis, and so while there's this great, again, pro of being a D1 athlete and you get all these great, accoutrement of being that things, you also have every eye on you all the time. Who you're eating with, who you're walking with. I remember when I was at Iowa State, there were some students that were literally intentionally trying to walk with some of the D1 athletes just to try and get noticed and to maybe get caught on camera walking with one of the top football players or whatever. And I'm just going, okay, it's not that big of a deal. Like, calm down.
Yeah.
What would you say are things that have surprised you in the D3 world that most people would think, oh, that usually would be a D1 thing?
Yes. So the biggest surprise to me. So in Division One, I'll try not to be in the weeds here, but in Division One, there are all these rules that limit how long you can practice. In Division Three, there are not. So ironically, a Division Three student athlete might actually spend more time practicing than a Division One athlete. And this is especially true in basketball. So what happens in basketball is a Division One, they play year round, right? So legit, you do not go home ever in Division One basketball. You're there in the summer, you're there before the season, you're there during the season, you're practicing after the season, right? And it's just a year round cycle. In Division Three, they cannot start practice until October 15th. And then when October 15th happens, they have to really quickly get caught up because games are starting in like 2 weeks. So October 15th happens, and all of a sudden you have 2-a-days. And, so in Division One, you're limited to 20 hours of practice per week. In Division Three, you might hit 20 hours in a weekend. And that was very surprising to me that there are no limitations on how long you can practice. And the students actually spend more time practicing in Division Three than they do in Division One. And that's true across the board. As I described kind of 3 types of schools, all 3 types of schools have that same issue in Division Three. Yeah.
What else have you seen as far as like longevity of collegiate athletes? Like, so you see these football programs and some of these other sports recruiting massive amounts of first-year students or redshirt students. Are they staying through for their whole 4 years, or what's going on?
I would describe it as a red flag for really. So I have a couple answers to this. So at the Division Three level, it is a red flag if you play football and you come in and there are 50 guys in your class, right? That means that they expect half of that class to not make it 4 years, to transfer away or to leave school for some reason. You want to be in a class of 25, right? That's the reasonable number. Same thing with basketball. If you come out to basketball and you're in a class of 12 people,
right,
that's many people, right? Yeah. And again, the expectation is that half of them are not going to make it 4 years. And there are some schools that in Division Three that really need athletics enrollment to survive. And in that, they offer a spot to anybody with the expectation that, hey, you get on campus and you're there for at least a year and maybe stay longer. And it's almost scammy in that way, right? So that is a big flag. So take a look at roster sizes.
Right.
And again, so basketball, if there's a roster size of 15 to 18, that is a healthy program to be at. Football, if it's a roster size of like 60 to 80, that's a healthy program to be at. If all of a sudden you look at football and it's a roster size of 150, it's a big red flag. But the same thing happens at the D1 level. And what happens at D1 is they'll bring a bunch of guys in and they will say you can try out during camp, and then X number of you will make the team and X number of you won't. But anyone gets an invite to try out, essentially, right? And sometimes they'll frame it as being a preferred walk-on. That's a term that you'll hear a lot. You're a preferred walk-on. I would just use it with caution. And there are some programs that really is the case, right? So at the University of Wyoming, we had preferred walk-ons, and 3 or 4 of those guys every year would get a scholarship during their junior year, right? They were preferred, and then they would earn a scholarship over time. But there are some programs that everyone's a preferred walk-on, and right, the bring it's just a way of bringing in a class of 50, knowing that half of them are going to bounce out. So again, it's something to really pay attention to, of like, what does that roster size look like? Is this actually a healthy program? And is this a place where I can be there for the full 4 years? Every place is going to publish their graduation rates as well. So it at the D1 level, it is part of their academic progress rate report. So they report on academic progress rate, and they report on like an athletics specific graduation rate and a federal graduation rate. So it's worth checking those out, because those are good numbers. And at the Division III level, you can see their federal graduation rate and see like how long people are really there.
To get into the weeds a little bit on that one, is that what families need to understand is that the federal graduation rate is often on the 6-year timeline, not on the 4-year timeline. And this drives me nuts when parents and counselors are looking up colleges. So you put it in your favorite search engine and you say, hey, what is the graduation rate for XYZ college? And it spits out, 89% graduate within that time. Is that the federal timeline, which is 6 years, or is that my preferred timeline, which is 4? So I always tell students and families, make sure when you are talking about graduation rates, get a clarification. Is this the 4-year graduation rate or the 6-year graduation rate? Because that can make a difference. So, yeah.
Well, this is a really important difference between Division I and Division III as well. So you might have heard that recently Trump had an executive order about all these things that he wants Division I to do. They're acting on one of them right now. And one of them is giving people 5 years to play 5 seasons. And what that means is that you're not graduating in 4 years. You're graduating in 5. And they're literally changing the timeline of college graduation. Division III just had a philosophy statement vote, kind of went through and defined what the philosophy is, and expressly said that Division III is a 4-year graduation. That the expectation that you play for 4 years and you graduate in 4 years. That you're not redshirting, right? You're not just practicing and not getting in the game, but you're playing for 4 years and graduating in 4 years. Division I is rapidly moving to you play for 5 years and you're there for 5 years. So again, that needs to be part of the calculus, because especially if you're not on 100% scholarship, if you're on 40% scholarship and you're on the hook for another 60%, that they might be factoring in a whole other year of 60% of tuition that you're paying.
And I appreciate you putting that clarification out there, and for people to really understand what that means. To get a little farther with that, for the 5-year program, if a student is in a 4+1, so a 4-year undergrad and a 1-year master's, does that still work?
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. And it's an awesome plan if you can do that.
So I know there is that option at many colleges now that they're offering a 4-year undergrad, and then they're saying, oh, you can get a 1-year, whatever, master's degree that way. For students and parents who are thinking about that, I always recommend make sure that your field of potential work wants you to get a master's that early. Some places don't want you to get a master's that early, and then we have to consider...
It's weird to get an MBA in that time. Yeah.
Right. So then you're overeducated and underemployed, and then that's not a good thing either. You and I have spent enough time in the higher ed world that it's just like, yeah, you don't want to front load all of your education, because then you won't have any experience to go along with all of this theoretical knowledge that you have. So it's like, oh, great. A lot of brains, not a whole lot of experience. So, yeah. Well, this has been an amazing chat talking about some of the differences between D1 and D3, especially from your perspective, Al, and I really appreciate this. I'm going to give you a moment to be a soapbox talker. So you have the attention span of my students, parents, and counselors that listen in on a weekly basis. What's the advice that you would give to them based off of what you've learned so far in your life?
Yeah, well, so I would say that as you're making your choice, it's important to weigh out not just the athletic experience, but also the academic experience. And part of that needs to be, kind of what are you going to feel from the athletic department, right? Are you competing at this high level? Is this a pathway to playing at another level, to going to the Olympics, doing those kind of things? great. If that's the answer, then then that might be the whole answer. But if it's not that, if it's just, hey, I want to play the game some more, then it's worth really weighing out, like, well, what are the academic implications? And if it means that, like we talked about, you're in online classes and 300-person classes, is that really the academic experience you want? And finding the right balance of those. And I would also make sure that you're taking the time to really understand the finances of it. That in some sports, in football, it truly is like, hey, here's all the money and you get to go to school for free. But in the vast majority of sports, it is not that much cheaper to be a D1 athlete than to be a D3 athlete. And in fact, I bet that if you were weighing, if you're a soccer player and you're weighing the University of Washington and Whitman College, I bet that they end up being about on par with costs, with after everything that Whitman's going to do for you financially, versus everything that being an athlete at the University of Washington does for you financially. I bet they come out being pretty similar. So it's worth weighing out, like, what's the actual cost, especially if you're not a full ride scholarship student. And there's a balance there, right? And the truth is, it might just be cool enough to be a Division I athlete, and that might be worth it, right? But there's a cost, and the cost is that if you're at a giant college, it's not going to be the same educational experience as being at this kind of small private liberal arts college, and weighing out and seeing where it is. And then my final thought is that just a reminder that ball is ball, and that there's a lot of prestige placed on Division I, but man, the game is still the game, and you're still breaking down film, and you're still lifting, and you're still doing all the same things you're doing at Division III. It's just kind of without ESPN watching. So lots of things to balance in there, and it's all about just finding the right fit, and that's the thing that matters most with all of it. And the right fit might be where the best athletic experience is, the right fit might be where the best academic experience is, and the right fit might be somewhere in between. And find that right fit, and you're going to be happy, and you're going to make it work.
That was a lot of great advice. You gave like multiple points, which I appreciate all of those things. That was a great also kind of summary of everything that we talked about today. So Al Reiser, Associate Director of Athletics at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, thanks for being a guest on the Don't Chuck It Up podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for listening to Don't Chuck It Up today. If today's episode was helpful, be sure you subscribe and share it with a family navigating the college search and the application process. I'll be back next week with more tips and tricks. Until then, remember, don't chuck it up.
Don't chuck